Hi, I'm here with Mike Tirico, and if you don't know, but you probably do know, so that he was announcer or been working at NBC Sports since 2016. He is very well known for his 10-year run, NFL play-by-play announcer on ESPN's Monday Night Football, and that he has covered everything from golf, tennis, hockey, World Cup soccer, and also the primetime host for the Olympics on NBC and lead play by play for Notre Dame football. He's covered Triple Crown races on NBC, NBC's Football Night in America, and hosted NBC's coverage of the Indianapolis 500 and the Stanley Cup. So we are so lucky to talk to Mike Tirico today, and we're going to focus on interviewing. But Mike, could you give us some insight as to how you became a journalist? What was your journey? What was your path?
Sure. It's great to be with you, Tracy, and nice to visit with everyone and talk about a subject that is near and dear to my heart, whether it's communications, journalism, newspaper, magazine, TV, radio, interviewing. And interviewing is also a skill set that I guess spills into our everyday lives as well when you're just having conversation with people. So I love talking about this topic, and thanks for asking me to do this. For me, I, as a kid, grew up wanting to be a sportscaster, which is really silly. I know I should have grown up wanting to be an athlete or something else. And I did want to be an athlete, and I just wasn't good enough. So that fast forwarded to being involved in high school newspaper, high school yearbook. We didn't have a radio or a TV station. I went to a public high school in New York City where that was not available. So it took me to look for colleges where sportscasters had gone to school or schools that had a robust communications program with a legacy and tradition. And growing up in New York City, Syracuse, New York's about 4 hours away by car. Syracuse was a school with a wonderful reputation for a communication school and thankfully still has that. And that's how I started this whole journey and adventure, writing for the high school newspaper, the college newspaper, I should say, working at the college radio and TV station. The radio and TV stuff kind of pulled me a little bit closer to that side of the journalism communications world. And I worked in local TV after my time in college and then went to ESPN, worked there for 25 years. You detailed some of the stuff I did there. And now I'm in my fifth year, sixth year really at NBC. So it's been a long time. This has been more than 50%, almost 65% of my life has been somewhere telling stories and interviewing folks, and I love it every day. The job still wakes me up with a great passion to learn and get better at it.
This is going a little bit out of order, but you've had so much experience covering so many different things.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious as to why do you do it?
Yeah, I've maintained a curiosity for it. I love being around different athletes, different sports, different things in general. It fits my personality to see the constant evolution, like the seasons change. You know, you get excited for spring, and you get excited for summer, and then fall. Maybe not as excited in Michigan where we live for the winter, but you get excited for all the change that comes. And I love when a new season comes and new athletes and new cultures too, because the culture around, say, a golf tournament is almost impossible to parallel with the culture around the Kentucky Derby or the Indy 500. But to be exposed to all of that just gives you a chance to tell stories better. And to me, whether it's as a play by play announcer, hosting the Olympics, or doing an interview, what we're really doing is we're telling stories. Everybody likes to sit down and hear a good story. Sometimes it's done through the prism of athletic competition, but oftentimes you care about those competitors because of who they are or what their connection is, whether it's to their college, their tough circumstances that they had to overcome on the way to becoming a pro, their mental challenges, all the things that contribute to the sports stories that we tell. I've always liked that. And the variety just allows me to be around more people in more different places. And I really enjoy that as a part of what I do professionally.
And when you think about interviews over the years that really stick with you, What are
Mhm.
some of those interviews, and why do you think that those interviews stick with you?
Yeah, it sometimes is not the biggest name, but oftentimes the biggest names are the best interviews, because what I find in sports is that the biggest names have a lot more mental bandwidth to how they perform. And what do I mean by that? I think that Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and Lindsey Vonn, the Olympic gold medal skier, people like that have put so much mental to go with their incredible physical. And that's why they've maximized their abilities and are doing things at a level that others, very few others, have before. And over time, I found those are the interviews that sometimes are the most challenging, because what can you ask them that they haven't been asked before? But your way of asking it, your way of creating a mode of conversation that they feel comfortable sharing in, sometimes becomes part of the game that you're playing a little bit. And I find when that's the challenge, I am at my most comfortable. I gave you those three names. Interviews with all of them stick out for a variety of reasons. Tom Brady detailing how he became involved in the performance aspect of this and the mental aspect that's helped make him great. Peyton Manning dealing with the reality of my football career might be over because of an injury, but this is why I wanted to keep going. I still had more unfinished work to do. Lindsey Vonn, the Olympic gold medal skier, interviewing her before her last Olympics at the family farm in Wisconsin that she grew up at, with her grandpa, who was the inspiration for her skiing career. And then, subsequent to our interview, her grandpa passed away, and that was the last time she saw her grandpa. Was when we went there to do that interview, and it was emotional for her there because in the back of her mind she had a sense that that could be the case, and that came through in the interview and came through after as well. He's created a friendship that we still have. So those are the things. It's a group of individuals who we see, but we don't really know. And if our interviews with them help us get to know them, and by and large help you as viewers get to know them, then I think the interview has some staying power with us and hopefully with the person who's listening or watching.
So I'm wondering, when you go in, right, these people have been interviewed so many times, and in
Mhm.
thinking about how can you tell the story that only you can tell in that moment, is it a combination of researching and thinking about the interview beforehand, combined with how you approach the interview and kind of where that interview goes in the moment? Can you
Mhm.
talk about how those two things play together?
Sure. I've never really thought of it this way until just now, but you all know the term TLC. It's kind of PLC. It's preparation, it's listening, and it's curiosity. Let's start with the first part. Sometimes you do have to interview somebody on a moment's notice. If there's breaking news and you show up on a scene and there's an eyewitness or a fire chief or somebody from a first responder perspective who needs to give you information, but those are where your basic journalistic trainings come into play. And for many of you who are interested in journalism at the high school level, it's great because you're starting to understand some of that now. And hopefully, if you follow that passion in college, you'll know who, what, where, when, why, and how has been taught for 100 years, and it still matters. Those are like the basics, right? So the preparation in a feature interview is different. It's researching somebody, it's reading about them, asking people who you know, who observe them, what do you think of so and so? Is there anything I should know about so and so? So that's the preparation part. Then it's listening. I'm a big believer that the most important trait in an interview, even more important than asking uh, the perfect question, is being a great listener. What I try to do if I'm doing a long interview and I have a fungible amount of time is I come with the first question and I come with the third question, but I hope that my second question comes off the first answer. Why do I do that? It forces me to be in the mode of listening. And as soon as the person being interviewed hears you ask a question off their first answer, many times they may realize, oh, this person knows what they're talking about. They're listening to me. And anytime somebody's not listening to you, you just kind of body language changes, you stop investing. But when they're listening to you, you invest. So I always try to use that as a device for asking questions. And then the last part is curiosity. You're just curious about anything, then you can be someone who can interview anyone on any topic and make it appealing to the person who really cares. So let's just say it's a crew, high school crew, college crew, rowing a boat, right? Not of particular interest to me, but something that if you can find what's going to be a magnet to someone who has an interest in this sport, then I can have a better interview. So I need to have a little bit of curiosity created, even if it's not there naturally, about, oh, this would be an interesting topic. Let me ask this person about that. So PLC, preparation, listening, curiosity, I think will serve you well if you go into an interview.
So did you just come up with PLC like on the spot?
Just just now, as you were asking the question, I was kind of thinking, I always talk about preparation, I always talking about listening, I always talk about
Or
curiosity. And as it just kind of popped in my head, I'm like, okay, that kind of works as an acronym. I work in those things as devices to remember
right.
stuff. So why not?
No, and it's a really, really good acronym, right? Like a good piece of advice, like PLC for students to remember, right?
Hmm.
Preparation, learning, and curiosity. I'm curious about when you started off as a journalist, because so many students in journalism are taught, have your list of questions,
Right.
right? So how do you go, or do you remember when you moved from, rapid firing questions at people to really listening? And what
Yeah.
is that shift of listening as a journalist? What does that give you?
Well,
Like
don't.
what's it?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't get me wrong. And I should have emphasized this. Part of my preparation is preparing a list of questions,
Right.
because you're going to forget something. It's invariable that when you're involved in conversation, you forget something. That's why it's okay to look down at your notes and look down at your questions. And I would say, if you're going to ask 10 questions, come with eight, but make two of the other questions to get to your total of 10 questions that you don't know, that come off of listening to that person. Because I do think that very often you'll hear somebody say something and it begs for a follow up, or they're opening a door for you. Walk through that door, follow up on that point. To me, that is just a something that people miss sometimes because they get almost mesmerized by their list of questions. I think part of the preparations, that we could spend a whole day talking about preparing for an interview. Part of the preparation is the reading and the asking. The big part of the preparation is organizing a list of questions. Sometimes you may want to hit a topic at the end that you hit at the beginning, because the interview subject might get more comfortable. And maybe I should come back and ask that a different way. And maybe I'll get a better answer. But that list of questions becomes very important, because that's your final draft of your preparation. So you've organized, I want to ask first about uh, teaching in COVID. I want to ask about teaching from home. I want to ask about, what do you notice from students? Whatever the questions are, have a plan, but then be ready to pivot and then come back to your plan. So I still will go in with a full boat of questions. Sometimes there'll be topics more than questions. But I think as you get started out, for a lot of you, you're just starting to do interviews. It, it's still a pit in your stomach, sweaty palm feeling when you have to get ready to do an interview with someone, because you want to ask questions that show that you know what you're talking about, but it's not the easiest question the person's ever received. And it's a challenge. We still feel that. I've been interviewing people for 30 something years and I still go through that. So don't feel bad about that. That's a good feeling. That means you care. Uh, but that is still a huge part of the preparation, along with listening to what the people are saying.
Has there been a time in an interview where you started and you asked a question and your interviewer or interviewee
Mhm.
pivoted away from that question and you followed it and you went in a totally different direction?
Yes, and you've got to decide how important was your question. It's like the political debates. If you watch those, the politicians are professional at pivoting, right? They'll just spin it to whatever they want to talk about. Now, how much of a hammer do you bring back to say, "Can you answer my question?" Do you re-ask it politely in hopes that they'll ask their question? Or sometimes they'll start opening a door that you weren't thinking about, that in your preparation you saw and you said, "That's not that important, so I won't go down that road." And now you do. Look, the great thing about interviewing and the reason I love talking about it is that it's such an inexact science. I feel like at times I don't do a great job. I feel like I don't listen enough. I get mad if there's something that was right there in front of me and I missed it because I was getting a time cue from a producer. I was so focused on my next question that I forgot to listen to the last answer. You can go back and kick yourself for the wording of every question you ask. You can edit it, fine tune it, change it, and it still doesn't come out right. It is not an exact science at all. It is far more of an art form, uh, but it's also something that you get better and more comfortable with the more you do it.
And when you went to go and interview Lindsey Vonn,
Mhm.
you said that her grandfather was there.
Yes.
And I would guess that your preparation for questions didn't include her grandfather, or did
Eh,
it?
I didn't know we were going to interview him. I knew he would be there, but I didn't know he would become part of the interview. And my questions to him, he was at that time either 89 or 91 years old. So I knew I wasn't going to ask him a lot of very in-depth questions,
Mhm.
but more reaction questions. And he was able to answer the simple questions with great joy and detail in his face and his voice and in the quality of his responses. So that's another part of the preparation process that is important. I think if you're going to interview a 10-year-old child prodigy, it's a little bit different than interviewing a third grader after a CYO basketball game, right? You have to know who your audience is and know who your interview subjects are. If you're going in to interview the superintendent of your school district, that's somebody who's going to be pretty well versed in big picture things in your school district. If you're going down the hall to interview your chemistry teacher on what it's like to do labs and experimental type things in a virtual world, well, that's a little bit different question than you'd be asking the superintendent. You're not going to ask him about budgeting and what's happening with this and will we still be able to do this when we come back and how can you do it in a safe COVID environment. Those things are for other folks to ask. So understanding what your subjects, I guess, parameters are to answer questions becomes part of the common sense that goes in the preparation of an interview.
Yeah, and you said something interesting. You said reaction questions. So when you
Mhm.
think about questions, are what are the kinds of questions that you think about?
Yeah, I think if you're doing an interview for information, there's some sort of a news story that's happened, and you're trying to find the details of it. You're asking a lot of what and when, um, and in many cases, how. Um, I think empowering questions are whys and hows uh, at the start of those questions. When I say, "How does it feel to be in this situation where we're doing this virtually?" Uh, why is it a challenge? Why is it more of a challenge? That empowers the person who is responding to the question to respond with their feelings, their view. It doesn't give them an off ramp or give them a help in their answer. I could ask the same question by saying, Tracy, it's got to be so difficult to do all of the teaching online. How hard is it? I'm leading you to say it's really hard, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And now, in some ways, as an interviewer, you're thinking you're being empathetic with the person you're interviewing. They're going to kind of feel that. But if I just say simply, how hard is it to do it this way? That gives you the leeway to answer the question honestly. You may say, hey, it's not that hard. I miss things, but it's not that difficult. So you've got to be really careful when you're asking a question in the law, in mock trial, in court shows that you see. It's all about leading the witness. The lawyer is asking the question they want the person who's being interrogated to answer in a certain way. Didn't they do this on this so and so date? In journalism or in curious interviews, you want to hear from the person. You don't want to always drag out of them what you think. Because if you're trying to tell the story that you want told, then you're not really there documenting the story or the event. You're just trying to make sure that your narrative fits the information you're going to get from the interviewee. So it's a very careful line you have to walk. I would say the powerful words are the hows and the whys.
And when you think about those powerful questions, right? The hows and the whys and all of these things, where are the interviews? Like what interviews? Because you've been a professional journalist for 30 years, right?
Hmm.
Right about that.
I'm old. Yep. More than that now, but yeah. Yeah. Actually 34th year of doing this. Yeah.
34th year of
Yeah.
doing it, right? What are those? I don't know, what are those interviews like when you think about, and you have the big one with Tom Brady, right? And Lindsey Vonn.
Hmm.
But what are the ones that stand out that are just from kind of more normal or
Yeah.
unknown people?
Sure. Sure. Covering college football, you get to talk to college students, and we're parents of two college students, so you know the age group and you know the sensibility, and just to be able to sit and speak with a player from a school. As we're taping this, I'm getting ready for a football game this weekend that Notre Dame is playing the University of Louisville. I'll speak to two players from the Louisville team, a couple of players from the Notre Dame team, and I love that because you're getting uh, to interview people you don't know what their interests are. You can do some preparation, but they're the everyday run of the mill interviews that are part of our existence. And they're not going to get anything but maybe a mention or two in our broadcast, in a 3 hour broadcast. But I love those because they're fun. I like asking the Notre Dame kids, what's your major? What's your favorite class you're taking?
Yeah.
And even by their facial reaction or how quickly they respond, you can tell a lot about the person. Uh, oh, I'm a political science major. I'm taking this election class right now, and it's so awesome to take right now. We have a great professor. Our conversations are really cool, even though it's virtual. It's just been so much fun. You can tell by their enthusiasm, their passion for it, a little bit of the profile of who the person is. So those everyday interviews, it's not just the transcript of it; it's the feeling that you got, the enthusiasm in their voice, um, the bright-eyed nature with which they answered questions that often will give you a tell into the personality of the subject that you're interviewing.
So that's interesting because you cover sports, right? You're preparing to cover the game, but still you want to know about the people who are playing that game.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you see a quarterback and here he is and he's a quarterback and he can throw the ball 50 yards and this year he's spent time in the offseason lifting weights in his garage to get stronger and all that. That's important. It's important to the tail, but it's kind of the run of the mill for sports conversation. But when you find out that this kid is international relations major and after football hopes to become a foreign diplomat or something like that, well, now you might care a little bit differently because maybe you'll see the athletes different. Maybe you'll be reminded that they're students as well. Maybe you have somebody in your family who wants to be a foreign diplomat, right? Maybe there's somebody in your house who's an athlete who also has an interest in international relations. Oh, cool! That's now my favorite player on their team. That's the way we kind of develop the warm nature for other people by their hobbies, their thoughts. Try to triangulate the person. Now we see that you wear number 3 or number 8, and we see that you're a senior, and see that you're from, Independence, Missouri. That's great. But now, can you tell me something about the person? Again, that is a little bit of their what, not just their information. What makes them a person, not just a line on a roster? I think when we can do that, that's important, and that's not just sports. When you're setting out to do a feature on somebody, why do people like to read features? They love with curiosity to find out what makes so and so tick. What do they like? Do they like coffee? Do they like tea? There's always something unique about each person.
Yeah.
And when you can dig long enough and deep enough to find that, it's rewarding for us as journalists. And hopefully, it makes our viewers, listeners, readers more excited about what we're going to do next.
Yeah, it is really cool because I haven't thought about, even just covering sports and that digging down into people, right? And connecting, making connections, especially at this point in time when people feel so disconnected, even if it's just
Yes.
like, oh, I like coffee or I like tea, whatever it is. In terms of college and thinking about college and
Hmm.
students classes, we have a lot of journalists, right, in high
Yeah,
school who are thinking, should I go to journalism school? Should I do this? Should I do that? What advice do you have for students who are high school journalists and thinking about their future?
sure. Not everything is for everyone.
Mhm.
Not everyone, whether it's resources or opportunities or interest level, wants to go to a school with a great reputation for communications. And I'll talk about those who do want to in a moment. If you don't and still have interest in this, it's great. There are college radio stations and college newspapers and college TV stations, and especially now in the social media day where we're all communicating in a much more accessible way, there are plenty of opportunities to keep scratching this itch and to do it. I think if you don't become a journalist, this is a life skill that can carry you in a lot of different positive ways going forward. Just if you get in front of a camera and do an interview, think about how much more at ease you're going to be when you go in for your job interviews. You get up and speak in front of a group of 50 or 100 people when you've had to go out and interview some figure in town who's a big deal and then write about it or talk about it on the TV or radio station on campus. You're going to go in front of people and feel comfortable. I've done this before. So those experiences will take the edge off the pressure you're going to face. So if you like it, do it. I think it's great. Now, for those who are really gung ho about it, and many of you are being involved at this level and having sat through this all the way to this point, this conversation, uh, college journalism is the best. It's so great. You're around people who want to do this. You're around people who, at age 20, 21, also have a goal of what they want to do. And very often you get to this point and you're not exactly sure what you want to do. And if you're not, but you think you might, it's a great way to find out, yeah, I want this to be part of my life. I'd love to do this for a living. That's what happened with me. I got to do this and said, I love it. And I still love it. And that was a free opportunity to kick the tires and say, this is the car I want to drive, to be in the communications and journalism field. There are many schools that do a wonderful job. You can look at the reputation of many of the schools. There are professors who do the great work of laying the foundation for what journalism is about. There's the space on college campuses to have more freedom of conversation and expression, more people to interview, more stories to tell, because people come from around the country and world to that campus. So you're really sitting in a small cross section of what the world is at that point. So it's all great. The one thing I would say is that get experience outside of your classroom. The projects that you all work on, whether it's newspapers, magazines, yearbooks, radio, TV, whatever press you're a part of in your high school days, it will be ratcheted up at the college level. And you have a head start. You can thrive. And almost every journalist, every broadcaster has some experience with college newspaper, radio, or TV. And even if you don't want to be on the air down the line, let's say you want to be a general manager of a TV station or work as somebody in the advertising or public relations field, crafting the message, uh, making content will make you so much better at promoting the entity or selling the entity in the business world or running the entity if you're in the front office of a TV station, a radio station, or in a newspaper organization, or I don't mean to exclude this at all, with some of the very important and influential websites. The meter has moved, the cheese has moved to different places in terms of where jobs are and where people consume their media. And the great thing is you are all living that. So you're going to know this is how people get their jobs. All right, I'll go here and try to tell the stories of my community or my country.
I keep thinking back, right, to how you try to get to the personal aspect of one.
Mhm.
And you said that you go in with your first question and you have your third question.
Right.
But I'm wondering, what advice do you have for students? How do you immediately, like, what is the commonality in those first questions? So what is
Sure.
it that you're trying to do that will give someone the space to feel comfortable and open up?
Yeah, I think if it's an experienced person, I'm less worried about I have to set a tone. If it's someone who's been interviewed 30 times, 50 times, 100 times, they know the drill. So you can just kind of get into it with them, right? If it's somebody who's never really been interviewed, who you know has some trepidation, some fear, they're nervous about being interviewed, then I think maybe you need to warm them up a little bit. Ask just a basic question. And you have to understand, do I have time? Do I have 15, 20 minutes? Can I invest a minute or two in maybe not the questions I want to ask, but I can just get them comfortable so I can get to the bigger questions a bit later on. And you know what? If somebody gives you a terrible answer in that first question, then you can jump to the third question.
Yeah.
There may not be something that they give you in that first answer because they're nervous or they're uptight. So if that's the case, that's fine. I'll go to the third question, and then maybe off the third question, I'll ask off of their response. It's just a matter of as you do this more, you're going to find what works for you. That just happens to be what has worked for me. And you do, like you said, it's been 34 years of doing it, so you've had bad interviews and you've structured what you thought was the right way to go about it, and it wasn't. Um, that's okay. That's fine. You just take what you learned and get it better for the next time. But knowing who you're interviewing is important. If you think it's somebody who's really scared about being interviewed, they said they really didn't want to do it, then you can't come in and hit them with the hammer on the first question. You're going to
Yeah.
have to say, okay, I'll warm them up a little bit and get to what I hope to get to in a more subtle way. So that's part of your preparation is understanding what we're doing and who we're trying to get the most out of.
You've said a couple times that you learn, right? You look back,
Hmm.
you learn, you think about this. So in terms of that, I'm curious, what have you learned in the past month? Like, what did you learn last week? What did you learn yesterday?
Yeah.
What are some
Yeah.
examples of those things that you're still learning? Because that's really inspiring that you are still learning.
Sure. It's sometimes it's a conversation that you're doing that you have only 3 or 4 minutes. So while you may want to follow up on a topic, you can't. You need to be disciplined about it and just move on to the next topic. I had, I don't know, maybe a 5 minute interview that I had to do, and there was a place where I really wanted to follow on something, and I did, and it meant I didn't get to something. And it's just that reminder of, okay, you know what? I really need to be more disciplined about uh, taking out a topic and being realistic that we're not going to get there. And I probably invested my time incorrectly there. That's okay. That's fine. No missed question is probably going to be the reason that you are no longer asked to do interviews, right?
Right.
If you get to a point where you get to start to do this, you're mostly going to be able to figure it out. There are going to be times that you screw up. It's okay. It's okay. Do it by trying hard. Don't do it because you didn't put the effort and time into it. When you do that, then I think you're going to feel really good about it. And I learn now all the time where to go for resources for my interviews. How much time do you spend looking at social media posts of a person to get a sense of how they're going to answer questions? How much do you go back through research that's 10, 20 years old as opposed to a year old? Do you ask somebody, hey, what would you like to know from Tracy? Just somebody who otherwise isn't down deep in the mine shaft of research on this topic that reminds you, hey, keep it keep it at the top level of information. We may not need that depth. The person at home may just want a basic answer. Here's a funny quick one. This has nothing to do with something that happened to me on the air. It was a friend who asked. There's a football, and because of sports, I apologize for the reference. There's a phrase in football that officials use that say when there's a penalty, it's called an illegal block in the back. I've just repeated that for 30 years because that's what it's called by the referees. Well, can there ever be a legal block in the back? Is it always an illegal block in the back? I don't know. And I had somebody who also covers football ask me that question. Say, hey, my wife asked, they always say illegal block in the back. Can there be a legal block in the back? I was dumbfounded. I said, I have no idea. So I'm going to ask that question of one of the rules experts that I work with.
There-
Again, it's a simple,
yeah.
simple thing that because we're so in deep on the research of it and the nuances of it, that somebody who's just watches football goes, well, that's that's counterintuitive. If,
Right.
of course, it's an illegal block in the back because it's a penalty. Is there a legal one?
Right.
So there. So I'll learn something because somebody who is not a professional journalist and not an ardent sports fan just observationally heard this and said, "Is that possible?" I'll ask somebody who knows, and I don't know, so I'm going to ask
Yeah.
somebody who knows. That's the curiosity I'm talking about right
Right.
there.
Right. So the other thing, and then we'll wrap up in just a minute. But the other thing that you have continuously said throughout this interview is that you love your job,
Hmm.
right? So can you kind of dig down a little bit deeper to what is it that when you say you love your job, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm really lucky to have the opportunity to do it at a level where I get to see some of the best athletes, some of the best sporting events in the world. So that's a blessing right there. It's hard not to love that. I think I love my job for two reasons. One, I enjoy sports. I'm a sports fan still. I love documenting sporting events and the camaraderie with the people we work with and the people we cover and watching athletes at the highest level. But I think the second part of it is I love the challenge of it. You cannot do our job perfectly. You could say everything right and be happy with it. Somebody will say, "Well, you should have said this," or maybe you could have done it this way, or maybe you could have left that bit of information out. And it's a constant jigsaw puzzle of information gathering, ordering it properly, making sure it looks good. But there's always one more piece you can add or subtract on the end, and I like that. I like that challenge. So it appeals to the preparation, execution, collaboration. All of those things are a daily part of what we do. You may not use each skill each day, but you're building them for some event, and then the event ends, and you start over,
Yeah.
and then you go through the same process again. And I really love that. And people come to what we do for enjoyment. Most people, they say they're diehard fans. It's a do or die game. I'll be crushed if my team loses. You might be disappointed, but by and large, you don't change how you live your life, what you're going to eat the next day, what your health condition is by the result of a sporting event. Yet people in numbers, unlike anything else, come to sports for enjoyment, entertainment, community gathering, all of that fun stuff, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing else like it. Music doesn't do that for people. The arts don't do that for people. Movies don't do that for people. Sports brings
Mhm.
all types of age, gender, race into one place, rooting for the same thing. That's really cool to be a part of, and it's something that sticks with me, and that's why I love what I do, and that's why every day it's still exciting. And I always get to say, "Hey, I have to watch this game for work," which is a pretty cool thing to get away with.
Is there anything else that you would want to say to high school journalists at this moment in time?
Yeah, very simple. If you love it, go do it. Do not be turned off by uh, comments about fake media or the media is biased or this or that. And that's not a political statement at all. It's a statement standing behind journalism and journalists. At the end of the day, whether Democrats or Republicans or the race issues or anything else, journalists are there documenting the history of the world. As journalists, you are covering history as it happens. It doesn't matter if it's the history of a company, the history of a sporting event, or the history of your country. And it's really cool because look at all the books over Tracy's shoulder, over my shoulder. Those are all stories regarding the history of something. And people took all the time to assemble their thoughts for these books, right? But you, as a journalist, sign up to cover history as it's happening, and you're asked to put it in context, perspective, and create informative content for people to absorb and be entertained by. And that is such a cool rush to be able to do that. So do not get pushed off of the trail if you want to be a journalist because of the climate in our country. Journalism has been around since George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and everyone in between there and now. And the world, not just our country, the world will always need journalists to document what's going on. So be one of those people, embrace it, and go do it. I will tell you that in the social media world and the hypersensitive world of information right now, there's never been a more important time for journalism, and there's never been a better time for journalism. So don't get pushed away by the noise. Turn down the noise, turn up the light, and go ask the questions that need to be asked for your community, for our country, and for the world, period.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank
Mike,
you.
we really appreciate your time, and it's been. I will always remember PLC. So
Well, I will now too. Thank you, and thank you to the not just the journalists, but thank you to the teachers, the advisors, the people who go beyond what their job is to give structure, advice, and guidance to the future journalists, because it's so important in our country. I know what you've done, Tracy, at Community High School in Ann Arbor, Michigan, has changed the lives of a lot of young women and men and made a great impact. And you stand as one of many people around the state of Michigan and around the country who do that. And we as journalists are all indebted to you, even though you're creating the people who are going to kick us out of our jobs at some point. But that's okay. It makes us better every day. So thank you, not just to the students, but the teachers and the advisors who make these things go.
thank you so much, Mike.
My pleasure.